You are currently listening to another episode of Off Key. Today we are talking about how the fuck you write a jazz song with Brian the Snowman Powers. Our spotlighted artist today is Andy Elwell. He currently lives in Minneapolis. The song that we're spotlighting is called Buried. You can find all of his tunes on iTunes and Spotify.
All that's left to pull me up is what's above the ground.
I think it's time for that question that you were going to ask.
Oh, this is one of my favorite questions. How the fuck do you write a jazz song?
Well, I tell you, it's a highly involved process. You have to get a bunch of Jell-O and some marshmallows, and you immerse yourself inside said Jell-O
In a bathtub.
in a bathtub.
And
hopefully.
okay, so let me get this straight. There's a bathtub full of Jell-O and marshmallows.
Yes, your
And
flavor.
Okay. And you sit inside the bathtub.
You sit inside the bathtub
With
and
your
you
saxophone.
And you
with your
marinate.
saxophone,
With
right?
your saxophone.
Yeah.
And mind you, you actually put some of the Jell-O into the saxophone, and you blow into it, and suddenly there's Jell-O all over the ceiling.
And then you record that, and then transcribe it, and then that's jazz.
It sounds like...
I mean, and what else would it sound like? No, and it kind of depends on the style of jazz. What's so funny about jazz, you guys, is that, okay, well, first of all, just a quick brief history about me. I actually studied jazz and classical in college and in high school and everything like that. But I played rock music instead when I did my gigs. I did a bunch of jazz gigs too, and I still do. But I was always more into rock and funk and stuff like that. But I loved straight ahead jazz. Actually, one of the reasons I didn't pursue it as much because I never thought I was as good at it as the other.
Sure.
But I love it to death. I listen to it. I still play it.
I think the whole reason why we came up with this question was the fact that with a pop song, you get that basic verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus.
Bridge.
Throw a bridge. Chorus, end.
Sometimes
And-
there's not a bridge.
Yeah, sometimes, and you just pretty much take those cards and mess them around, throw them up there, and however they land, that's your song.
Okay. Well, how long has that formula been in existence? Since pop music.
Since like the
So
40s,
say
like the 40s or 50s.
60s. More like 50s, 60s, because in the 30s and 40s, it was big band music, was the pop
Right, but
music
the
of day.
40s, like the late 40s, early 50s is when like quote unquote
Elvis
pop music.
and
Yeah.
doo-wop
It was like I would
and-
say I would guess late 40s maybe when that format.
Maybe. And you had, you still had, you had jazz songs like Louis Armstrong and those guys, and they didn't follow that same rule at all.
No.
Interestingly enough, pop music has not evolved very much. And what's interesting, it's stayed kind of in that formula for a long time. Yes, there's variations and all that kind of stuff. There's progressive music. There's all kinds of things that have changed. But predominantly, popular music form has not changed in a long time. That's why people are kind of sick of it. Jazz was very interesting in that, okay, so it took classical music centuries to evolve, all the way from Bach and Mozart and Beethoven, all the way up to Mahler, and then into the 20th century stuff, with Ravel and all that kind of stuff,
Sure.
and then into the super contemporary outside stuff that people just can't stand to listen to, and John Cage and whatever else you want to think about. What jazz?
Wait, is John Cage the guy who did the silent song?
He is.
For 4 minutes. Oh,
He's also a
I
guy
dig
who
that. That
played
is
a
some
piano
great
and somehow
shit.
took all the overtones out of it, and it sounded like a cage like screeching against tires or something. I don't know. But no, and so jazz, really, came from European marching band music mixed with classical music. And it's been around, the teens, the 20s with ragtime, all that kind of stuff. Well, it has evolved from, let's say, 1920, all the way up through 1960 when they were already at the avant-garde stage where classical music took centuries to get to.
Sure.
Jazz kind of built upon that model but did it quicker. And it evolved so fast and changed so fast that actually originally it was the popular music of the day. Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, the big bands, Count Basie. That's what you heard on the radio. That's what people loved.
Yep.
That's what the kids were dancing to, right?
Sure.
Well, it evolved so fast into a more cerebral form of music that rock and roll took its place as popular music. But jazz went underground then and kept evolving, where popular music has stayed the same because it wanted to stay popular. It's almost like culture, right?
The sounds of rock music obviously evolved, but the structure and the basis of the song has always been kind of the same compared to jazz, which has gone on farther and farther and farther.
Well, what you had, I'm not saying that anyone's any less talented, but jazz was a very thinking man's kind of music. It was very cerebral, which is all funny because a lot of it is African-American, Afrocentric based. They really helped issue in this super cerebral music with jazz and improvisation, whereas pop music was done by a bunch of people who could barely play 3 or 4 chords, and yeah, they could sing great, but as far as the ability it took to consume that music, it doesn't take nearly the complex of a mind as it does to consume really, really high-end jazz. You know what I'm saying? Like most people listen to it, and the reason it sounds like chicken squawking is because they can't follow the form, they can't follow it has gone past that, either for good or bad. Whereas pop music has remained very digestible because they realized we can make a lot of money with this. So they've kept it very digestible, where jazz kind of went off the deep end.
Sure. Nice.
So, who is your favorite jazz artist? And who are some of your favorite saxophone players? Because for our listeners at home, Snow is a kick-ass saxophone player.
Well, let's see. I love Julian Cannonball Adderley. He's a bebop saxophonist, and he also did R&B music as he progressed and evolved. And just a soulful cat, really swings hard. Love him. John Coltrane is great. Charlie Parker is great, of course. All the big names that you hear associated with jazz saxophone. Never was a huge Wayne Shorter fan, although I loved his compositions. Loved Branford Marsalis, another cat from New Orleans, and he was always a highlight. But I love Maceo Parker. I love King Curtis. And the R&B stuff. And actually, as a saxophonist, I spent a lot of time listening to and emulating Aretha Franklin.
Really?
Loved how she sings. She sings almost like a horn player. It's amazing to listen to.
Just kind of the lines and everything that she uses.
Yeah, the lines. She improvs a lot. She changes her own melodies a lot. And unfortunately, that kind of rubbed off on me to where sometimes I'll be jamming like, okay, I don't know the song anymore. What are you playing? I'm like, oh, yeah, the song. No, I'm just kidding. The song is the most important thing.
I think that's one of those things where people are listening to this. If you're young, you're playing sax and you're trying to figure out, how to step it up. That kind of idea of, I never even thought about that as a guitar player going, I want to listen to what Robert Plant does with his voice and try to emulate that on my guitar. I mean, it's like one of those things where I'd more focus on Jimmy Page when he's playing, So I think that's pretty cool that you actually emulate someone's voice with your sax.
I think all musicians should emulate singers because they breathe. And a lot of guitar players and keyboard players, a problem I have with their playing is they don't breathe. And it's just this run-on stuff. And what it does is, since most people have hard time digesting instrumental music anyway, you get a guitarist or keyboard player playing the coolest stuff in the world, but he takes no breaks. And it's a constant stream of noise, and people just get turned off after a couple of minutes.
Sure.
But some modern guys, well, not modern, but Grover Washington Jr., love him. He was actually kind of a smooth jazz and a fusion guy. Gerald Albright, who's around now, is one of the best technicians around, and he's an amazing player. He's one of my favorites too. But and all these guys, what's funny is I've been listening to so much pop music, and because I play a lot of pop music and I play a lot of reggae music actually, and world beat music, and I just recently started listening to saxophone players again, and it's been actually a breath of fresh air.
Thanks for listening to our chit chat. Now you can listen to Andy Elwell and his jam, Buried. You can find all of his songs on iTunes and Spotify. Be sure to listen to the next episode where we have our lovely speed round, my favorite.
Heavy hands dragging me down. All that's left to pull me up is what's above the ground. Until you come around, until you come around. I've gone blind to everything true. Lost my way and got caught up in, kept reaching up and breaking through until you come around, until you come around. I'm buried here. I'm buried here. I'll salvage what I know I've got and speak to you on borrowed breath. Looking down on what I've failed to place. All these words and in my faults are what's from here to take until you come around, until you come around. I'm buried here. I'm buried here. I'll salvage what I know I've got and speak to you on borrowed breath. I'm buried here. I'm buried here. I'll salvage what I know I've got and speak to you on borrowed